Hello and welcome to Rippercast, your podcast on Jack the Ripper and the Whitechapel murders. This is episode 15, Paul Begg A-Z, originally released on May 25th, 2008. Paul has been a co-host on a number of shows of Rippercast, but today he is our guest. Welcome, Mr. Begg, and thank you for coming on.
Hello to all of you. It's a bit of a worry to be on the other end of the grilling.
Yes, I know you're in the hot seat today.
Yeah.
Paul Begg is the author of Jack the Ripper, The Facts, which was published as The Uncensored Facts in 1990, and then rewritten and published in 2000. He is also the author of The Definitive History and co-author of The Definitive History Count 2003, Scotland Yard Files. He co-authored with Keith Skinner, as well as the A-Z with Keith Skinner and Martin Fido. The A-Z is expected to be republished with many updates in the near future. Paul is also editor-at-large for Ripperologist magazine. Paul, how did you first become interested in the Whitechapel murders?
That's a difficult question to answer because I vaguely remember seeing a program way back in the 60s, and it was I don't know why I would have seen it because it was a late night program, and I think it was just an insert in a discussion program. And I was interested in the Ripper just basically because I was interested in historical mysteries, and it was a historical mystery. And then I think probably like most people, I think the first book I read that I remember distinctly reading was Donald McCormack's The Identity of Jack the Ripper, which I found totally incomprehensible at the time. And then Stephen Knight's book, which I found extraordinarily readable. And my interest really was because having been born and bred in Cardiff and at that stage still living there, and Mary Kelly having connections with Cardiff, I started going through the Western Mail and getting copies of Kelly's the accounts of the Kelly murder from the Western Mail. Then gradually we were getting towards the centenary. The Uncensored Facts actually came out in 1988. It was the only book I think that actually came out in the centenary year. All the others had come out, fortunately for me, in 1987. And as we were getting towards the centenary, I realized that nobody had actually done a blow-by-blow account of the Ripper crimes themselves. So that at that time, I think even Don's book, this off the top of my head, so you can all run away and check it, but I think it's something like about 1/5 of the length of the book is actually devoted to a discussion of the crimes themselves. The rest is devoted to a discussion of virtually all the suspects, and Don obviously doesn't then come forward and put his own suspect forward, but he went on and discussed plays and Jack the Ripper in the movies and things like that. So I really wanted to do a book that was about the who saw and said what, where, and when, and actually dispense with the suspects altogether. And I only included Druitt, Kosminski, and Ostrog really because the McNaughton Memoranda was one of the contemporary documents from the period, and so it kind of had to be included. But I certainly didn't intend to come down on any suspect, and frankly I don't think I did. So when I sent the manuscript off, I called the book Jack the Ripper, The Facts, because if I'd been doing a book about the suspects or the theories, then I would have called it Jack the Ripper, The Theories, or Jack the Ripper, The Suspects, or Jack the Ripper in the Movies, or whatever. But as I was trying to deal with the facts, I called it Jack the Ripper, The Facts, and the publisher inserted, for some obscure reason, the word uncensored, which I never liked and never wanted, but I didn't have the clout to go up against the marketing department and say, well, look, I don't want this. And I don't think I had the clout to do that either when I did the revised and updated edition, but I just think they just let me get rid of Uncensored. I think maybe by that time they saw that it wasn't really all that sensible. And so the book came out when it was revised as just plain Jack the Ripper, the Facts. That's the story of getting into doing that.
How long did it take you to write it?
Well, I think it probably took the best part of a year of physical writing, but that involved a good degree of research because as soon as I had got the contract to do the book, I then went out and bought all the files and got copies of the files from the Public Record Office, the Scotland Yard and the Home Office files. And I think Stuart and I are probably the only people who did that, not unsurprisingly, because it cost over £1,000, which 20 years ago was, £1,000 now is a lot of money, but 20 years ago it was a considerable amount of money. And so I got all that material and I was incorporating all of that stuff as I was writing, so it was a fairly labour-intensive exercise.
Paul, did you know anybody at the time to help you with your research? I know you were a writer before the Uncensored Facts, but did you know any of the leading people in the Ripper field at the time that you started your research into the book?
No, absolutely none at all. And I had a little bookshelf that now wouldn't contain half the collection. Well, nowhere near the collection, but it had my copy of Cullen and Farson and Robin Odell's book and Dodd's book and so forth. And I thought, it's quite exciting. One day I'll have a book there with these people, and that was great. But no, I didn't. In the course of writing, because Keith and Martin's book or books had come out prior to mine, I cannot now remember. I think I contacted Keith because he hadn't got Druitt's mother's medical records, and I, by some quirk of luck or good fortune, had managed to find them. And how the hell I found them and Keith didn't remains a mystery to both of us to this day. And I think I contacted Keith to let him have this information, and so that's how Keith and I got talking. I think he'd met Martin, and that's how Martin and I got to know each other as well. So in the process of towards the very end of doing the book, yes, I had Keith and Martin, and Keith did supply me with research that he'd done, which he hadn't incorporated in the Ripper Legacy with Martin Howells. So I was extremely lucky in that respect.
You had mentioned that you don't single out any specific suspect in the book, The Facts, but you do spend a lot of time talking about Aaron Kosminski, or at least the Kosminski that is mentioned in the Swanson document. Can you give us an idea of who you think the strongest police suspect was is now?
Well, I'll just preface my remarks by saying, first of all, that when it came to writing when I was doing the Uncensored Facts, Martin's book came out, and it was Martin who really made the connection between, and in a big way. I mean, I'd kind of figured that Anderson, here we've got Anderson talking about a Polish Jew, and here we've got McNaughton talking about a Polish Jew called Kosminski, and I thought maybe they were one and the same. But Martin's book came out, and he made the big claim that Kosminski was Anderson's suspect. Or I'll rephrase that, because obviously he didn't. He went on to say David Cohen was Anderson's suspect, but you know what I mean. I mean, he identified Aaron Kosminski as being a Polish Jew and set out to track him down in the medical records. And towards the end of the writing of my book, the Swanson marginalia came to light, so I had a chance to see that and incorporate all of that. So that tended to make the chapter a little bit longer in the Uncensored Facts. And thereafter, of course, an inordinate amount of effort has actually gone into trying to prove that Aaron Kosminski wasn't the suspect, or that Anderson was talking through his backside, and so forth. So it kind of made the chapter on Kosminski in the Facts to be far longer than I would personally have wanted it to be, and also put considerable length and wordage into the book, which made it a lot fatter than it would otherwise have been. And unfortunately, it kind of branded me along the line of being Kosminskiite, which I'm not. Which leads me to the second part of really the main part of your question, is that I think that Kosminski is the main suspect now, is the top of the totem pole of suspects, simply because you have Anderson and Swanson, both senior officers at the time, both very well informed, basically saying that he was. Now, I don't know whether they were right or whether they were wrong, and I have a feeling that they were probably wrong, but I think from the research point of view, Kosminski's got to be the one that we look at most closely, just if for no other reason than to shift him out of the frame, to get rid of him.
Right.
So that's when people ask me, who do you think Jack the Ripper was? I invariably say either I don't know, or I say, well, I don't know, but Sir Robert Anderson, who was the head of the CID at the time of the murders, so on and so on and so on, which isn't necessary, because for the most part, you can't, when somebody asks you that question, you can't go into all the ins and outs and problems and everything else associated with that suspect.
Now, when you say that if it wasn't Kosminski, then you just don't know. Do you? Is there a type that you would lean towards? Would it be someone like him? Would it be a Polish Jew? Do you favor another named police suspect, or are you more leaning towards it being in the quote unquote unknown local man, Polish Jew type that kind of gets characterized if someone isn't set on a certain suspect?
Well, I certainly don't think that if it wasn't Aaron Kosminski, then it's got to be some other Polish Jew knocking around. Although that is a separate sort of argument which drags in things like David Cohen and the confusion hypothesis and things like that. But I must admit that I think the chances are that if the police didn't know who Jack the Ripper was, or if the suspect didn't fall within the ken of the police at the time, then the likelihood is that Jack the Ripper was just one of the many local people who shifted from DOS house to DOS house. They didn't carry the records that we carry today, and it's quite likely that he probably died in a common lodging house, unknown, unsuspected, unmourned, and we will never know who it was. I think that's basically it. There are all these other suspects, but you have to, if you're looking for a police suspect, it's either one of the many that they investigated, most of whom I would suspect that we have no idea who they were, and that would be it.
Along those lines of police suspects, it seems that 20, 30, 40 years ago, police suspects were most focused on, whether it be Farson or other people. And today, many modern writers on the subject, they're sort of dismissive of the police suspects and of McNaughton, Anderson, and Swanson, and Warren as well. And I was just wondering if your take on that. Does that say anything about?
Well, I think that really when you look at Jack the Ripper, the fact it was the theme of a talk I just gave at the Docklands exhibition along with Stuart and Robin O'Dell. And I was saying there that I think that when you look at the way that the Ripper developed from Matters through to McCormack, in each of those cases you have the author consciously, or I think probably unconsciously, trying to put a face to the Ripper. They're trying just to throw light on the Ripper by giving him some sort of occupation, which or whatever, that explained why the crimes were being committed. In the case of Dr. Stanley, for example, Matters was just giving us the story of a crazed doctor seeking to avenge the untimely death of his son. Now, that kind of was designed to lessen the fear of the Ripper, lessen this lurker in the shadows that we can't protect ourselves against. It was an attempt really to say, well, look, everybody else was safe from this guy except those people who were connected with the woman who caused the son to die. And the same goes through with others. In the case of William Stewart, for example, it's a midwife trying to cover up botched abortions, through to McCormick that it's a whole bunch of it's got all to do with Russia, which at the time was a major news concern at the time, what with the Cold War and everything else. Then along came Farson, and in 1959 with the Farson's Guide to the British Television Programme, in which he was able to identify Druitt, because he had obviously he found them at Norton Memoranda from Lady Aberconway. At that point, of course, it changed the whole thing, because it made it look as if it was possible that the police might really have had some idea who Jack the Ripper was. And that's carried on, and then Don came along with a complete account of the crimes, which was non-suspect orientated altogether. And there was Stephen then came in with the Royal Conspiracy and changed the whole thing again, because it made the Ripper a kind of worldwide phenomenon. But Stephen Knight and Dr. Stowell being the Gull and the Duke of Clarence, and so it all changed. And I think it's now got to the point where we've done the facts side of things, and books are coming along where people are looking at those police suspects and being a little bit dismissive of them. And I'm not quite sure which way it's going to go now. I think we're seeing a lot of specialist books coming up looking at specific aspects of the case, and those, of course, are being made even more available through self-publishing. But I'm not sure what the theme will be from here on in.
You mentioned that you recently did a talk in the Docklands Museum, and recently there's been some questions about the treatment of the victims at the Docklands Museum. Once again, speaking of specialist areas, Neil Sheldon's book came out dealing with the victims, and he's somewhat upset about the lack of respect shown to the victims. I guess that would be a good way of phrasing it. What do you think, as someone who has seen and spoken at the Docklands exhibit? How do you view it? Do you think that the victims were given their fair shake?
To be honest, it's difficult to answer that question, because I went round the exhibit and I can't say that I was struck by anything that was wrong. Maybe I was just blind to it, or maybe because Neil is so involved with the victims, maybe he just homed in on something that escaped my attention altogether. So I can't really comment on that, but certainly, I think the exhibition is an excellent exhibition. I'm not so keen on the book, but I think the exhibition is very good. I think it's got great stuff in it.
Further to that, do you think that there's any chance of a permanent type of display that maybe both the public and researchers could use?
I would very much doubt it. The trouble is, it seems to me, is that is the fact that the records and the material that they've got there have been loaned from so many different places, and indeed some of the documents that are on loan from the Public Record Office, they can only be on loan for 3 months, so they're going to have to, for a while, some of those documents are genuine and some are facsimiles and clearly marked as such, and then the real ones will go back, and the ones that are currently facsimiles, the real documents will replace those. So to actually get a permanent exhibition, I think would probably, in those circumstances, would be almost impossible. People just the documents will just stay wherever they are being preserved, be it over at Scotland Yard in the Black Museum or the Crime Museum, as it must now be called.
But I would think there'd be some merit to having it all centralized as one thing. I mean, I realize that, the Holocaust museums that are everywhere, and I think it would be an interesting idea, rather than having some in the Crime Museum, the Black Museum, whatever, to bring it together as one place. I doubt that it will ever happen, but
I think it would be great. And it would be wonderful to have it as a repository for people to be able to go and look at this stuff, because one of the things that's missing from the exhibition, of course, is the Swanson marginalia, because apparently the Crime Museum wouldn't or couldn't or wasn't asked or whatever to lend it to go on show, which is a pity. But so it'd be great for all this stuff to be visible to people, to be able to go in and look at it. And I think you're right, it should be. But whether ever it will be, I don't know. It's all down to the subject. I mean, I think the subject tends to be a little bit tacky, or I don't think it's tacky, but it's viewed as being a bit tacky. I mean, we don't really want to get involved with that. So I don't know whether the council or anybody would think in terms of setting up a museum.
yeah, I guess it is going to suffer from that same affliction that I'll do with the Jack the Ripper affliction.
Yeah, it's I was worried at one point. I got seriously worried because the book that accompanies the exhibition, and I want to stress that I think the exhibition is great. It's the book that I would have a beef with. Is that, it's called Jack the Ripper and the East End, and the jacket has got Jack the Ripper in inch-high letters and is dominated by an iconic image of the top-hatted Ripper. And if I go out and I spend £25, and I did actually go out and spend £25 on a book that's called Jack the Ripper in the East End, and it has inch-high letters and so on and so forth, I kind of expect to at least find a chapter in the book on Jack the Ripper, and this one doesn't have one. And also the first mistake is within the first 7 lines of Peter Ackroyd's introduction, so you come away from looking at the book, and I thought, well, this isn't very good. This looks as if they're using Jack the Ripper, reluctantly using Jack the Ripper, because they know it's going to draw in the crowds, but really they want to do an exhibition and a book about the East End of London, which probably wouldn't be anywhere near as popular. And that was the feeling that I got from the book, and I was seriously, I went along to the exhibition with a very, very jaundiced eye, thinking that's what it was going to be about. And I came away being very pleasantly surprised, so I was quite happy with that.
Back to your book and some of the comments you made earlier, your book, The Facts, on your opinion of Anderson and Swanson. In your book, you called Anderson self-satisfied, opinionated, eccentric, and a man of many contradictions. And you also went on to point out many of the conflicts between Swanson's marginalia and what appeared in Anderson's book. When you have 2 high-ranking police officials that seemingly that don't quite make the case for the suspect that they name, why do you still believe that that Anderson and Swanson are the ones who are in the best position to know, if that makes any sense?
Right. Well, Anderson is head of the CID. Swanson is the man who was given overall responsibility for the investigation. Now, obviously, there could be a Bobby on the beat who would think, oh, well, Joe Bloggs down at the bottom, that he's really strange, and I think he's Jack the Ripper. And it may well turn out that the Bobby on the beat was perfectly correct. We wouldn't know that, of course, but that could turn out. So the Bobby on the beat would have far more experience of the small area that he was responsible for than would anybody else. And then you go up the ranks until you get to Aberline. Well, he was largely responsible for the investigation in the East End itself. So because that's where he'd spent most of his career and was known, and it was an area that he knew, and so he would have known all of that. But when you start to get up to Anderson's level, and particularly Swanson's level, they would have had all the information coming into them from all over, from every police division. They'd have had all the city information coming to them. They'd have had all the provincial information from the provincial forces. They would have been in direct contact with all the foreign stuff that would have been coming in. So they would have had a lot of information, and also Anderson, albeit in précis terms, would have had the basic details about all the leading suspects. So if Anderson actually thought the evidence against Kosminski was stronger than the evidence against anybody else, then I think we have to give some credence to that. Obviously, we have to take into account Anderson's personality and character. But in addition to all of that, we tend to make kind of assumptions when we refer to Kosminski as Anderson's suspect. We don't know that he was Anderson's suspect. McNaughton, in fact, refers to him in one of the versions of the memoranda as an individual against whom the police had very real suspicions, or whatever the precise phrase is that seems to have just flown out of my memory. So, I mean, he could be a police suspect, by which I mean suspected by other policemen. The fact that they don't appear to have known about the identification is curious, but nevertheless, this guy may not have been Anderson's suspect. It just one of several suspects who comes within his ken. He knows about an identification parade that seems to have taken place. Hardly anybody else does. We don't know why. So, yeah, go on.
Yeah, both McNaughton and Swanson name Kosminski, but they don't give him a first name. They just give him a surname, Kosminski, and it's generally assumed that he's Aaron Kosminski because that's the only Kosminski that is found in the asylum records. And I was wondering, is it possible that Kosminski is not Aaron Kosminski?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of problems with Aaron Kosminski. One of which I point out quite often is the fact that there is no real reason to suppose that the identification was separated from the committal by any great distance or length of time. So we're looking at Kosminski having been identified in late 1890 or early 1891, then being released into the care of his brother, whereupon the family have him very soon afterwards. He's committed. Now, we know what state of mind he was in when he was committed, wandering the streets and picking food out of the gutter and hearing voices and so forth. Now, why? Well, when Anderson is talking, and Swanson, we're told that the witness refused to give evidence because he knew that his evidence would result in the suspect being hanged. Now, there's no way that Kosminski in 1891 would have been hanged. He was insane. He would have been sent to an asylum. He was manifestly insane. There was no doubt about it. The best that could conceivably have happened is that he would have been brought up before the magistrates, who would automatically have had him examined by medical men and certified, just in the same way as happened to David Cohen. And then he would have been put away. He'd never even have been brought to trial. So the reaction and the belief of the witness seems really odd if Aaron Kosminski was the suspect. So there's, you can therefore say, well, it can't have been Aaron Kosminski then, so therefore Kosminski has got to be somebody else.
But Anderson altered that caged in an asylum identification for his book. Would that maybe show that the identification could have been made before he was certified a lunatic? Or
no, Swanson says that he was that's what happened, because if you remember, Swanson basically says that the police, with great difficulty, took the suspect off for identification, where he was identified. The witness refuses to testify, so they release him into the care of his brother, where he's watched around the clock by the city CID again.
Right.
Question mark why. But so Anderson, so Swanson is definitely saying that the identification took place before the suspect was committed, and I think the emphasis that Anderson places upon the witness, who he clearly seems to blame for them not having been able to proceed with a case against the suspect. Again, the witness's refusal to testify or otherwise would have largely been irrelevant. Well, it would have been irrelevant if the suspect was already committed, because they wouldn't have then brought him to trial anyway. So I think that original thing, about the identification taking place in the asylum is almost certainly wrong, and so we have to look at this the identification having taken place before.
Now you once suggested that Levy was possibly the witness in the Seaside home identification.
No, I actually. Sorry, go on.
No, go ahead. Like if you didn't say it, or
I didn't actually say that. What I discovered was that Joseph Hyam Levy was a signatory on the naturalization papers of a man called Martin Kosminski, and I just suggested that Martin Kosminski and the Aaron Kosminski families were known to one another. Then it may well be that Joseph Hyam Levy would have known Aaron Kosminski or whoever, and might have recognized him and then been the witness. But I didn't sort of really put Levy forward as a really as a viable candidate. Yeah, I mean, he behaved a little oddly, and you can make a case for it, which I probably did, but I don't think I was literally putting him forward as the witness, because I've always thought that the witness was probably Schwartz.
Which basically answers my next question. Go ahead, Jonathan.
No, well, if you would like him to elaborate on that one, Robert, go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to ask. Like, why do you believe that Schwartz was the witness?
Well, first of all, Anderson describes the witness as the only person who had a good view of the murderer. And as much as I hate sort of looking and taking words quite absolutely literally, I just don't think that could apply to a chap who was seen standing talking to Edos. I mean, there's just all the vendor and that group saw was a man and a woman standing together at the entrance to Mitre Square. That seems a little, you can't really describe him as the murderer. Although, of course, if Anderson had already made up his mind that the man seen was the murderer, then that would, my comment there just is totally meaningless.
And if they had used lavender, wouldn't the city police, wouldn't they have had to inform them?
Well, yes. I mean, that's another aspect of all of this. You take away. I mean, it all gets really kind of complicated. But yes, the city police are investigating a city crime, which would be the murder of Catherine Eddowes. And if the vendor had been the witness, then she would have been the witness to the murder of Eddowes, and that would have been made him a witness to a city crime. You would then have to prove that he was also responsible for the other murders in the Met area. So and also the city CID would presumably had Kosminski or whoever it was under surveillance anyway, so wouldn't they have brought the vendor in to identify him and all that sort of stuff? It just gets a bit iffy. But I just felt that the most likely witness was Schwartz, who saw, or at least claims to have seen, a man physically assault a woman whom he identified as Elizabeth Stride, right outside the place where her body was discovered a little while later. The chances of Stride actually having been murdered by somebody other than that man is probably remote. By no means impossible, but probably remote. It seems too much of a coincidence. So I think that fits Anderson's description. But of course, the whole thing is that Lavender was brought in 1891 to try and identify Thomas Sadler. Now, Sadler was identified a couple of weeks after Aaron Kosminski was committed. So, in other words, Aaron Kosminski would have been positively identified by a witness at least several weeks before Lavender was brought to identify Sadler. So, I mean, I can't imagine. Obviously, they wouldn't have asked Lavender to identify Sadler if he'd already just positively identified Kosminski. What are they going to do? Go up to him and say, "Oh, excuse me, Mr. Lavender, I know that a couple of weeks ago you said that that Polish Jew was Jack the Ripper, but we got this other guy now, and do you think you could just come along and see if he was the one?" I mean, they just don't do it that way. At least I seriously hope they don't do it that way. In which case, the fact that Lavender was brought in to identify Sadler would write him out straight away as being the, as far as I'm aware, anyway. I mean, somebody may come up and say, "Oh, no. They used witnesses who made positive identifications to brought them in further identification parades and so forth, in which case I will stand corrected. But just right now, I think that it does write him out.
Another issue that comes up with the Swanson marginalia is him referring to Kosminski being going into the Stepney workhouse. And we know from the records that Kosminski spent a couple times in the Mile End workhouse. And when Martin Fido, for instance, in his book, The Crimes, Detection, and Death of Jack the Ripper, makes the point that there was no workhouse called the Stepney workhouse. In fact, Stepney encompassed a good half dozen different workhouses. All having different names. There was the Mile End Workhouse, there was the Limehouse, Ratcliffe, St. Leonard's Street Workhouse, which is sometimes referred to as the Stepney Union Workhouse. And in your book, The Facts, you posit that Swanson meant the Mile End Workhouse could have meant the Mile End Workhouse when he referred to it as the Stepney Workhouse. Would you like to elaborate on any of that?
Well, basically, all I was trying to do there was to make an observation which I thought should be made. If after all, if Aaron, and I'm going to emphasize it, if Aaron Kosminski was Kosminski, then Swanson obviously made a mistake. And it seems to me that it's only right to suggest a plausible explanation for that mistake. Now, of course, if Swanson didn't make a mistake, it can be argued that the marginalia is a fake, and it can be argued that Aaron Kosminski wasn't Kosminski, and so on and so forth, and that's all perfectly justified. But as I said, if Aaron Kosminski was Kosminski, then Swanson made a mistake, and one has to try and find or see if there are any plausible explanations for that. And one, without really looking for it, I mean, the fact is that by 1910, Mile End Old Town had been absorbed by the borough of Stepney. It was, at that point, part of Stepney. And so, I don't know, it just seems worthwhile making the point that maybe Swanson said Stepney Workhouse because at that time Mile End Old Town Workhouse was in the borough of Stepney. It's not a big deal. I'm not trying to say that this is an explanation for Swanson, and I would have hoped that would have come across in the book. I'm just having done a fairly lengthy analysis of all the evidence pro and con for Kosminski. I listed a number of the issues which or things that Swanson says that don't fit Aaron Kosminski, and you just throw in a possible explanation.
Right, in that Stepney workhouse could have been used as a catch-all phrase to encompass the system of workhouses located in that borough, as opposed to trying to...
No, I mean just saying that Mile End Old Town, because you get these different areas, and it's like it's now all Tower Hamlets, for example. I mean, Tower Hamlets was a small area at one stage, and so on. They expand, they absorb areas. All I'm saying is that in 1910, Mile End Old Town was part of Stepney. It was so, he could have referred to it as Stepney Workout, because that whole area was that just as today I might refer to, I don't know, Whitechapel being in Tower Hamlets, because it is. It wasn't back then, but it is now. And Mile End Old Town wasn't in Stepney in 1891, but it was by 1910. It's just a throwaway observation. A great thing to be read into it.
Where do you stand on the canonical five as the only victims of a single killer?
I don't really, because, as I said at one stage, Elizabeth Stride, for example, I mean, Schwartz could have seen Elizabeth Stride being murdered by Kosminski, and Stride not have been a victim of Jack the Ripper, in which case the whole Anderson thing, as far as Jack the Ripper is concerned, goes out the window. So I don't necessarily think that they were all victims of Jack the Ripper. I think the canonical five is a good catch-all term for the crimes which I would include Tabram in that group, which were responsible for a better word or term, was the Autumn of Terror. That's what focused those 5 or 6 women. The murder of those 5 or 6 women focused all the press attention and everything else, and created the mystery that we have today. That's basically my view on it. I don't necessarily see that there's a big issue about calling them the canonical 5 or the canonical 6 or whatever.
Right.
So you basically see them as a symbol rather than necessarily victims of the same hand?
Yes. I mean, in saying that, I'm not saying that I don't see them as victims of the same hand, and I'm not saying that I do see them as victims of the same hand. What I'm saying is that as far as you say, yes, that they represent what caused the Autumn of Terror and really what all the interest is. You can't take any one of those crimes out of that. The double event really is the apotheosis of horror that those crimes created, and that the murder of Stride was just as much a part of creating that fear and terror as was the murder of Eddowes. And so they both, I mean, what's the point in trying to divorce them? It's only when you start to analyze the victimology, if you like, and or whatever the term is, but start looking at to see whether or not they were all killed by the same hand, that becomes important. But overall, I mean, it all contributed to the fear.
I have a sort of off-topic question, but it was just something that struck me as I listened to your answer. You don't come down on one side or the other on Kosminski. It's more of a generalization. You don't come down on one side or the other. As far as the victimology of the canonical five, give us one absolute in Jack the Ripper as you see it. One totally certain principle that you believe insofar as Jack the Ripper.
I knew that if there was going to be one really tough question here, it was going to come from you. I sensed that. I don't know. You have to give me time to think about that.
We'll come back at the end for the follow-up.
Yeah, there were a series of murders in the East End of 1888, and that's about as much as we can say with absolute total certainty.
Paul, when you updated the facts, you were also working on another book, another Jack the Ripper book, The Definitive History, which we really haven't discussed, which is rather different than the facts. It sort of takes a social history and view of London's East End, and I suppose there's only about a third of the book devoted to the murders, and you don't really discuss suspects really outside of the police suspects that much, as you've covered all of that in the facts. But I was wondering why the two books, why you just didn't incorporate it in one book, like why you felt you needed to do two.
Well, I think that well, I was asked to do the definitive anyway, which is probably a good enough answer. Truthfully, I had always envisaged something like a kind of Jack the Ripper trilogy. I wanted to do, and it never worked out that I was able to do it one by one, and I probably wouldn't have been able to, because I don't think I would initially have known enough when I did the Uncensored Facts to have been able to do anything like the Definitive History. But people often say to you, why does Jack the Ripper cause such interest today, and things like that, and the answer to that basically is threefold, and you have to look at why the Ripper murders caused such a sensation at the time, and that's really what the Definitive History was trying to answer. It was, and in very simple terms, lots and lots of different things had happened to focus attention on the East End of London, so that the stage was primed and ready and waiting for Jack the Ripper to walk onto it, and Jack the Ripper came to embody all the fears that were going on in the 1880s, because it's not generally realized that just how frightening a decade the 1880s were, because there was a hell of a lot of social change going on. And today we're quite used to all of that. We're used to change happening very rapidly indeed, and we tend to kind of absorb that. But back then, change was not that common. And so lots of things were happening in the 1880s. They were because you had Josephine Butler, you had people talking about prostitutes openly. I mean, prior to that, there hadn't really been much of an area for discussion. And you had the Salvation Army cropping up. You had concerns about homelessness, poverty, and so on and so forth. So there are lots and lots of things, and most of all, the unemployed were beginning to flex their muscles a bit through unionization and marches such as the one in 1887 on Trafalgar Square. And a lot of those marches began from the East End of London. So again, all of these things tended to focus attention on the East End. And as I say, as Jack the Ripper walked onto that stage, it was all ready for him. And virtually the whole press were able to grab hold of Jack the Ripper and use him to bludgeon whoever they wanted to. Like the Telegraph was bludgeoning the Home Secretary, and other newspapers were having a go at the police and so forth. And that's what really turned the Ripper into the sensation. And I wanted to put that in a book, and then have the facts, and then have a book that maybe looks at what happened after the year of 1888. And that way you cover the whole spectrum. So
and another,
does that answer that question?
Robert?
Oh no, go ahead, Jonathan. Like that answers the question.
Another book that you have participated in writing is Jack the Ripper A-Z. Now, we talked to Martin a few weeks ago, and about the new edition of the book that's coming out, and he said that you had a more limited role in putting together this new version of the A to Z. Could you describe to us what your role in this one was, and kind of give us an idea that we know that there's going to be taking out of the old material and the insertion of a lot of new material. Could you kind of give us an idea of how that's going to appear?
Yeah, I didn't play as big a part in the production of the book as I have done in the past, largely because I developed as most of you know, I've got a heart problem and had to have a bypass a little while ago, and it was a recurrence of that, and I had to go back into hospital again for another, not another bypass, but another angio thingy, and so I was kind of unfortunately taken out of the loop whilst I was waiting to go in, and after I'd come out. So that's kind of changing a little bit now because of the delay in publication. We're still updating, so I tend to be doing all that updating work now as we go along, and Martin is taking the back seat a little, so a kind of reversal of roles. But as far as the update is concerned, the last one was 10 years ago, so a hell of a lot of things have happened in the course of the last 10 years that we needed to incorporate in the book. And we also wanted basically to rewrite the whole thing, to make some corrections to errors that creep in. I mean, the subject is so vast that it is physically impossible to escape making errors. Even with 3 people working on it, it's difficult. And of course, the first thing that you see when the book hits the bookshops is you open it and you see glaring errors on every page that you come to. But we've rewritten it. It's been completely rewritten. We've rewritten practically. I would say we're supposed to have rewritten every entry, and I think we probably have. We've had to take out all the fiction and the films and all that sort of stuff, and we have had to take out the personal entries for everybody who's still alive. So you only get a personal entry now by being dead, and that was tough. But when we first did the book, the internet didn't exist. I don't think there were any of the magazines around, and the number of books being published weren't that many. So you could basically give an entry to almost anybody who'd written on the subject. But of course, these days now that is physically impossible, and it would be nightmarish to actually start trying to determine who has made a contribution worthy of entry and who hasn't. And so we thought it best just to take out everybody who wasn't dead. We even discussed taking out the people who were dead, but realised that we couldn't actually do that. It was just that made a nightmare of complexity then. But yeah, so it's thoroughly revised, and I hope we've corrected a number of the mistakes that have been made in other previous editions, but no doubt there will be some that have crept in.
Now, a prior publishing deal for the new edition had fallen through, and as you're waiting for a new publisher, you're continuing, until this day, you're still tinkering with different aspects of the book.
Oh yeah, I mean, every time something comes up that is new or different, or because I mean, all the articles that are being published in Ripperologist and elsewhere and everything. The Docklands exhibition, for example, we were aware of it, and in fact, had been were consultants to it 2 years ago, but we didn't have an entry for it. So because it obviously, I mean, it didn't exist at that time, so we didn't really know what we could put in. And there are just loads of new books coming out. And I mean, I'm just hoping that R. Michael Gordon and Dave Yost have got 2 coming out shortly from McLaughlin, and I'm waiting for those books to appear. So hopefully we can include those books as well. And of course, every every new book, if there's some new insight into one of the suspects or the victims or whatever, which requires a cross-reference, then you've got to readjust that entry as well, and it can take an inordinate amount of time to actually add in just little details to all these different entries.
When you're writing when you're writing something like the A to Z or something of that nature, you're essentially making judgments or judgments really on your peers, your colleagues, your coworkers, people you know in the community. Has that been a problem for you, and how have you addressed those sorts of conflicting emotions? I know, for example, if I were writing an A to Z, I'd be prone to be very favorable about, certain people, and less favorable towards others based on nothing factual necessarily, but just my own opinion. How do you war the need of personal opinion versus actual fact?
It's not actually as difficult as it seems, because apart from anything else, there are three authors, and so and contrary to expectation, Martin, Keith, and myself, we are quite different people, and so how you sometimes read about comedy duos, and they really hate each other in real life. Well, we don't hate each other in real life. We're all great friends, but we are different people, and we have different interests, and we like different things, and we are affected in different ways by things that happen to us, and so if I decided that I really didn't like Jonathan and wanted to put something into the A to Z about Jonathan, then Keith and Martin would undoubtedly block me. And so I wouldn't be allowed to do that. We have a very strict voting system where if Keith and Martin disagree about something, then it's up to me to resolve the dispute, and I will come down on one side or the other, and we quite amicably accept, or sometimes not that amicably accept the judgment of the other two. So really, it isn't a problem, and there aren't that very many instances where you have to be judgmental. I think, especially now that we're not putting in living authors, you're not judgmental of people who are going to care all that much and come after you with a baseball bat. So it's not a major issue. There have been a couple of famous cases where we have said something that people have disagreed with, which is difficult. But generally speaking, I would hope that we don't come down too judgmental on people. We had a stock phrase, I think, about certain books that we thought were quite not that reliable, which we said should be treated with caution. I think that's fair enough, and oddly enough, most of the people that we've said that about agree. And accept it as a fair and unbiased judgment, which is basically what we try to be throughout the book.
Now, people such as myself have been waiting for an update of the A to Z, and actually, I've been waiting for other things as well. I've been waiting for Whittington Egan's quest for Jack the Ripper, which has been in the works for about a decade, and I'd also like to see maybe Alexander Kelly's bibliography and review of the literature updated, although I don't know how practical that would be in book form. Are there any titles that you would like to see updated, or?
I don't know that there's titles I'd like to see updated. There are titles that I would like to see more widely available. If I had the money, I wouldn't mind reprinting things like Matters and William Stewart and Robin Odell's book, which I understand that Robin's book is actually going to be reprinted by Mandrake at some point, but I'm waiting for that one to come out as well. I'd like to see. I was very impressed with Philip Hutchinson's book with all those new pictures in it. I'd love to see a big, fat, huge book come out with all the illustrations in, and and all the drawings and everything else, so that you could see over a couple of pages every picture of Berner Street or whatever. That would be fun, but I can't imagine anybody being able to ever do it, or a publisher willing to make that kind of commitment to that sort of book.
One of the most mainstream popular books come out in the last decade or so has been Patricia Cornwell, Case Closed. Excuse me. Since she's a living author, I take it she's not going to get her own entry in the new A-Z. But nevertheless, what were your first impressions of the book when you read it, when it came out? And what can you tell us about what may be going on with Patricia Cornwell and Keith Skinner's collaboration to come out with a new edition of that book?
I must admit, I didn't feel the venom for Patricia Cornwell's book that seems to everybody else seems to have felt, and it's difficult because I don't over here. Patricia Cornwell isn't, or doesn't appear to be, the celebrity that she seems to be in America. I mean, I get the feeling that she's a much bigger name in America than she is here. Not that I wish to point out that by the way, that she's not a big bookseller here. She is, but not kind of a TV celeb. And so, I don't know what I thought of the book, really. It was just, as far as I was concerned, it was just a suspect book, just another suspect book, and I didn't think that it made the case for Sickert, but it was interesting, and she came up with a couple of bits and pieces that, if they panned out, I thought would be interesting. So I don't really pay the book a great deal of attention, to be honest. As I say, it was just a suspect book. As for now, I do very strongly feel that, as I've been saying in a few places, that we ought to cut her some slack, because I was at a dinner at Scotland Yard that she was the guest of honour at, and she came across to me as a quite a likable person, and she was open, she was frank, she didn't seem the arrogant person that everybody says she is. And she said at that time that she acknowledged that she'd made mistakes. She said that she wasn't going to call the new edition Case Closed, and she was very emphatic about that. And she talked about how Keith and she had got together, and what it was like working with Keith, and so forth. And I got the impression, I mean, Keith tends to be, he doesn't shrink from confrontation too much, and so he does stand up. If he thinks that something's wrong, he'll stand up and say so, and he'll tell you. He worked with Feldman for a long time, and I mean, Feldy, at times I described him as a steamroller, and I'm one of those people. If a steamroller's coming at me, I kind of get out of the way, and Keith just stands there and argues his case, and he doesn't seem so. So I have no doubts that Keith will be, if he doesn't think that Patricia Cornwell is saying the right thing or reaching the right conclusion, I've no doubt that Keith will tell her straight to her face. And Patricia struck me as the kind of person who would accept it. I think she came across as a vulnerable but quite gutsy lady to me, but as far as what they're doing, that's something that I know nothing.
I'm going to have to disagree with you on the gutsy part, because to me it seems like the average ripperologist, you, Stephen Ryder, anyone, can't go on primetime television, Dateline, primetime, like Patricia Cornwell did, and on those nationally well-established news networks that you or I have no chance of getting on whatsoever. She slandered a large portion of Ripperology while doing the exact same thing herself, making money off of Jack the Ripper. The one, of course, that strikes near and dear to my heart is saying such things as, just because you run a website doesn't mean you know anything about Jack the Ripper. And she used a national forum to slander, degrade, and disparage a large group of people. And we don't have a national forum to defend ourselves against in. We don't have the kind of access that she has. We can't refute those charges. And for her to say at a small, closed dinner in her honor, which is another thing we don't really have access to, but for her to say in a small group setting, oh, well, yes, I made mistakes, that to me doesn't mitigate the fact that she went in front of a national audience and made those mistakes, made those judgments against us as a group, against specific people as a group. And so I just have to wonder, it's very easy to apologize for something when, it's very easy to say, oh, I'm sorry to a small group of people, but she said those remarks to an entire nation, the world, an international world. And to say, oh, at a small dinner, well, I've made some mistakes, that doesn't seem to me to be sufficiently, it doesn't mitigate it enough for me to say, okay, well, I'll give her a second chance. I've never heard her make those remarks. I completely believe you that she did make those remarks, but I heard with my own ears the disparagement, and I would like to hear with my own ears or read with my own eyes the apology before I'm willing to say, okay, I'll give you a second chance. And if she does do that, then I'm perfectly willing to give her a second chance. But a sort of secondhand apology that I hear about through third-party people, no, that doesn't cut it for me. I want that direct apology. And I'm just wondering if that's sort of, you heard the direct apology, so you're willing to give her a second chance, or you didn't hear the original remarks, because I know Primetime's an American show. I don't know if it transfers. So I'm just wondering if that sort of plays into the overall dynamic of it as well.
It's difficult. I honestly don't know how to answer all of that, because I understand where you're coming from completely. And I did an editorial for Ripperologist back in 2002 or something, in which I made a comparison of things that Patricia Cornwell had said and so forth, and a lot of the remarks that were made by her critics. And I must admit that I came across feeling that a lot of the criticism that we had here was directed at Patricia Cornwell personally, and so they were picking up on character and personality traits, and they were calling her names, and they were doing all of that. And there was one point where she made a reference to the fact that FBI people had warned her that Ripperologists were lying in wait for her in England, and I thought that utterly bizarre, because I would have thought that the FBI would have been concerned with a bit more than what Ripperologists think and do. It was kind of strange to think of us being put on a kind of terrorist list. But Patricia Cornwell appears to have believed that, and when she came across here and did a television program here, and she was there were a lot of Ripperologists were invited to go along to this thing. She came across with, I gather that she came across with bodyguards. So, and she certainly didn't appear. We were all there for about an hour beforehand, chatting and everything before we went into this into the studio to meet with her, and she never appeared for anything like that. So, as far as I'm aware, I mean that is possibly true. So, for right or for wrong, she was obviously fed some information that caused her concern. Now, I don't know how much of what she said about Ripperologists in the States was based on this information that she apparently got from the FBI.
It was prior.
Right.
This was right when her book came out, so all of this was prior to the alleged incident where the FBI told her that ripperologists were lying in wait for her. So this was all right at the initial outset.
So I don't know what the ins and outs of all of that are, and if I ever get the chance to meet and sit down with Patricia for any length of time, I will try and ask and find out. All I know now is that she's hired Keith to help with the research and so forth. I don't know whether the book her revised edition is going to be significantly different from the one that went before. I don't know what Keith really is doing for her. I don't really have much of a snippet of information that comes from Keith, because he did a book once and I didn't even know the book existed. No, I don't think he's ever mentioned it to me at any time. That he did with the curator of the Black Museum. So he's a fairly tight-lipped character, but I don't know. I think that she's probably. I'm prepared to give. I think what it is basically, Ali, is that I really just don't like. I don't like the insults that she made to about ripperologists. I don't like the remarks that ripperologists and the art critics made about her. I would just prefer her book to be judged on its merits, and on the edition that we've got now at the moment, where we pretty much know how we judge it. And I just don't like all this insult stuff. I don't really want to see her being called cornball on the internet or anything like that. That's just not me. It's just the way I'm not that way. I just don't like that sort of stuff, I guess. And if anything, then I'm just coming out with a kind of personal thing. There is that it's just something that I'm not that fond of. I can't keep saying the same thing over and over again here. I don't know where else to go. I just don't like that. I'd rather just judge the book.
Yeah, and I think part of that would also be that whenever the object of your debate or your discussion, as I said, Patricia Cornwell got to say her piece to a national audience and has never, as far as I know, debated a ripperologist for good or for bad, or come to answer any questions that weren't very carefully screened or monitored. I think Chris George managed to call in once at a radio program and ask a question that was much kinder, of course, and less specific than the one I would have asked. But I think that I don't agree with the cornball either. I think that's a weak form of argument when you resort to it. But I think it just comes from that overwhelming sense of frustration that she used a national platform to insult us all, and she refuses to present herself to be debated in an actual fashion and to stand up to hard questions about her theory in a public forum. And I think if you're going to use a public forum to get your point across, then you ought to be answerable in a public forum. If you're going to, just sort of put your opinion out there in a way that nobody can debate you, nobody can question you, that's going to breed a lot of resentment. If you have something to say, be there and be accountable for it and be open to questions. And when you don't allow that to happen, then, it just breeds that sort of vicious resentment that sort of expresses itself sometimes in some not good ways.
I just respond to that by saying that I think on the one hand, I get the feeling that Patricia Cornwell is a big name. She's a very wealthy lady. She's earned a lot of money from her book. She's an extremely popular author. She gets these things thrown at her. It's kind of a way that the number of television or radio or other programs that I do is probably more than the number that Robert McLaughlin would do, and so it's sort of like. I'm not trying to suggest that Robert would be envious of me, for goodness sake. I'm digging a hole here, which I'm fighting to try and get out of. But Patricia is just that sort of bigger name thing, so she gets all that stuff thrown at her. It doesn't make her it doesn't mean that she's necessarily better than anybody else or anything like that. It's just that, you know, she has the name, she has the presence, and so she'll get that television production, which you and I won't. And yeah, she shouldn't. It would perhaps have been better if she'd kept her mouth shut and didn't say those things. But I don't know why she said them, and I assume that there would have been reasons for it. I don't know. I can't really say much more.
Well, we are. You have one more thing to say, Ali, or?
Nope, I said that pretty much covers it.
Okay. Robert?
Oh, yeah, you know me, I always have a last final question, and usually has little to do with Ripperology. You know me, it's something usually offbeat. Paul, you've been around for about 3 decades, and you've essentially known everybody in the Ripper world, and I was just wondering, like, you know, past or present, you know, if you're going out on the town, like, who's the best Ripperologist to hang around with, to go out with and have fun time?
Oh, God. I don't know. Again, they're all different. I mean, Stuart Evans is just he can sit and just talk, and you just sit and listen to him, and that's good. I mean, he's not much of a drinking companion, and so that's Stuart out for a night out on the town. I don't know. I really don't know. Don is good company. Martin, Keith. It's that really is a tough one. I get on with Richard Jones. I've known Richard Jones for 2 decades, and he's a good one to go out for a beer with. I really don't know. Everybody who writes on the Ripper just seems to generally be different. Robin Odell is just a gentleman. Great pleasure to be with. It just makes you feel good.
Philip would probably take you to the best concerts.
Yes. No, Philip is actually quite good company as well. I mean, he's a good he's a good listener. No, he's not actually. He talks all the time.
Well, then I guess if you can't pick the best one you've already hung out with, who would be the one you'd want to have the drink with that you haven't yet?
Oh gosh. Well, actually, the one who I regret, 2 that I regret not having met personally, and Stephen Knight died before I was really involved in the field, so I wouldn't have met him, but I would love to have got his autograph in a copy of the book. And the other one was Donald McCormack, and I did have a chance to meet Donald McCormack on a couple of occasions, and I never managed to get there, and so I think that those would be the 2 that I regret not having met. I was lucky enough to meet both Dan Fasten and Tom Cullen, and so yeah, McCormack would have been I'd love to talk about, you know, facing somebody and asking them the hard questions over a beer. It would have been nice to have asked Donald McCormack a few questions about his book. But so I don't share the general consensus of opinion that he was a total charlatan. I have a feeling that Donald McCormack had been in the newspaper business for so long that he may well have got bits and pieces that haven't surfaced yet. I'd just like to have known a bit more about all of that.
All right. Well, Robert got the final question in, and we're about an hour and 20 minutes into it, so I'll wrap it up here. You've been listening to Rippercast, episode 15, Paul Begg A-Z. With coming to us from Kent in the UK was Paul Begg. Thanks for being in the guest seat today, Paul. Thank
you for being so gentle with me. That's very generous of you.
Well, it was great fun. Also joining us were Ally Ryder and Robert McLaughlin. Thanks to you both for being on the show today on such short notice. And it's Memorial Day weekend here in the United States, And so thanks to Ally for taking time off from her beach-going activities to be on the show today.
You owe me.
Okay. And Robert, thank you also.
Yeah, always a pleasure.